When I have a conversation with an organization, I think about where do you think you're underperforming? Conversely, instead of it in a negative way, where do you see the opportunity for growth? There's the concept of the technology, and then there's the what do we want to do with it? And that's where I think the rubber meets the road in terms of what do you believe? And are you bought into it? If you don't have a hypothesis, then make a guess and test something small and affordable. You have to attach to some goals that are reasonable and then set out to achieve it. And I think AI can play a role, but I also think sometimes it's just a matter of doing the work and getting the visuals and working towards it.
Welcome back to our second episode of Data and Confused. We're going to be talking with Bill Walsh, continuing our conversation with him. Again, Bill is a former employee of BlackBaud and is really one of the key implementers of their core fundraising platform, BlackBaud CRM. Hi, Bill. Welcome back. I'm glad we're able to continue our conversation here about data and nonprofits and technology and, dare I say, even BlackBaud.
All those great things. Thanks for having me back, Glenn. Really enjoyed our first conversation and
absolutely.
Looking forward to more.
So I have a question about data warehouses.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I know. So this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially with our larger clients that have BlackBaud CRM. And I guess I'll just preface it in saying that it feels like BlackBaud has put a lot of thought into figuring out a lot of the things with the transactional database, right? Donations and planned giving and events and volunteers and, all the things that need to go into just sort of the care and feeding of the organization's data. Then there's the concept of a data warehouse, which is now we need to maybe look at the data in a different way because we need to do some more analysis, more deeper reporting, all kinds of other things might come into that. And it will vary from organization to organization. So is there a good best practice or is there a good approach that an organization can take to get started on a data warehouse? And what are some of the pitfalls that you see organizations run into when trying to go through a data warehouse project?
Ooh, that's a big question.
I know.
Took that big. Let's start first with some conversation about the BlackBaud data warehouse.
Okay.
And let's sort of set the stage. So a reminder of the history that BlackBaud CRM was built to be enterprise scale. And in order to do that, one of the challenges you asked in our last podcast, what's the difference with Razor's Edge? With Razor's Edge, as you start to scale beyond, say, 75 or 100 users, the simultaneous impact of all the users in the core system can become, performance degrading and really can become significant. And one of the primary use cases is query and reporting. So part of the reason for a data warehouse with BlackBaud CRM was to manage scale and performance for larger organizations. Imagine users with 200, 400, 1,000 users. And I preface that because this also has to do with the follow-up, which is when do you start considering your own data warehouse and what are you trying to do with it? Now,
Gotcha. Okay.
Performance and scale are just one of the considerations. And for BlackBaud data warehouse, what I tend to acknowledge is it's primarily first and foremost for the BlackBaud CRM solution, not necessarily an organizational-wide data warehouse. You can bring and append other information into it, but you're going to be creating custom schemas and models for all of those things. And so we want to be a little careful and maybe not thinking of it as your institutional-wide data warehouse. It can be, but maybe not for everyone. And so I think that leads me to that conversation. What are your organizational-wide needs? Would you think about integrating finance? Do you think about integrating mission data, delivery data, case data, conversation data, phone call data, third-party information? One of the best practices I think organizations try to do, but maybe don't always succeed as well as I think they maybe could, is data appends, looking at information from other sources, pending interests and other types of data from other places beyond address correction and phone appends. I'm talking about what can you learn, whether it's structured or unstructured. And so that word structured and unstructured leads to some of the more modern concepts that Microsoft Fabric and other warehouses allow for unstructured data and real-time streaming pipelines to be consumed and for performance to be managed, right? Glenn,
Uncharted waters for some organizations.
it
Yeah.
is, and maybe a
Yeah.
little overkill, right? I'm sure you've seen, people ask about it, but do they really need it? But what I'm seeing is the performance management of hitting that overnight envelope. The new modern capabilities of tools like Fabric allow for high performance push of raw data and then doing an ETL inside the Fabric environment and reducing the pressure that exists on the overnight window, say for BlackBaud CRM for multi-gigabyte transfers or even terabytes. That was becoming a real concern for some of the larger customers as their data volume increased. Had you seen anything like that before?
Um, I guess just taking a step back, I think, what I see with BlackBaud CRM is that here's a solution that, does a lot of things, but basically we, BlackBaud, have made the software for you. You learn the software, therefore you can do all these amazing things. Sure, you can customize a few things, but basically you're learning our software. And in the case of data warehouse, BlackBaud CRM does come with a data warehouse. And so, yes, you can do some, we'll say baby's first data warehouse, right? With BlackBaud CRM, which could be plenty for most people. I guess it's that sort of build versus buy thing, right? So it's when you start doing data appends and start getting into these other things, I see it more as like for your personnel, do you need to have somebody who specializes in this? Do you need to have
Hmm.
somebody on staff that this is their job? Just sort of whether they're a data person or a report writer or, you know, more of a programmer doing some of these kinds of, you know, lifting of things. I think that's part of more of the question is sort of that build versus buy thing.
Honestly, I might be controversial, but if your organization can afford Blackbaud CRM, you're probably large enough and complex enough to need both. You probably need BBDW for specific types of reporting scenarios and maybe building a campaign report or another, performance-based report, stats, numbers, counts. And if you have made the investment in Blackbot CRM, you're probably big enough in scope and scale to need personnel and resources, as you mentioned, and you probably have 20, 30 other systems in place. I'm guessing there's a reason to consider a more institution-wide warehouse as well, Glenn. And I know that's the most expensive answer possible, but it's about partitioning work, so to speak, into the right place, if that makes sense.
So is there a reasonable, I don't know if you want to even use these terms, but like return on investment? So it's like what, even from a board level perspective, what kind of return in investment can I get if I'm going to allocate a certain amount of the budget to, we'll just say, big data, data analytics, these kinds of things? Like what's the expectation there? Is that even a fair question? Can we expect a return and be able to know to say, hey, yeah, we got this much more donations because we invested in doing the preparation and research and stuff and the analytics. Yeah.
No, I love the question. This is how I think of that when I have a conversation with an organization and I think about where do you think you're underperforming, or conversely, instead of it in a negative way, where do you see the opportunity for growth? For example, many organizations have huge passionate donor bases and are maybe not putting a lot of effort into plan gifts, just as an example. And we know there's wealth transfer coming, lots of conversation around plan gifts, but what effort is being applied to that specific area? Um, so, for example, you mentioned ROI, effectiveness, and what to do. Well, that's an area that if there's a hypothesis that you could capture more of your current donor population into a titled plan giving agreement more than just say, I've left you in my will, but actually be getting some proofs, some documents, and perhaps some dollar amounts and figures, then wouldn't there potentially be an ROI to invest a data analysis, augmentation, and analytics process supported then by the communication actions and follow-ups in that particular area? And so I'm trying to steer us. There's the concept of the technology,
Yeah.
and then there's the what do we want to do with it? And that's where I think the rubber meets the road in terms of what do you believe and are you bought into it? And if you don't have a hypothesis, then make a guess and test something small and affordable, right?
Right. Right.
Imagine that you thought there were more big donors in your database than you're getting big gifts from.
Mhm.
Well, what if we did some analytics projects, took a look at our annual fund donors, did some screening, did some work, ran some analytics, and looked for lower hanging fruit, and did a phone calling campaign to 100 people that
Right.
either AI or better models surfaced, and just test and said, did that work? And so I think I'm trying to put it back you have to attach to some goals that are reasonable and then set out to achieve it and then do the work. And it may or may not prove you right. But I think analytics is underused in those types of areas. And I think AI can play a role, but I also think sometimes it's just a matter of doing the work and getting the visuals and working towards it. That's in some areas of innovation.
Yeah, yeah. So I think when I hear that, what I see a lot of times at organizations, they'll task existing staff who may not, they may have some exposure, but may not have the expertise in all these things to sort of do some of these initial trials, some of this initial uh, work to proof of concept it. Is that an effective use of resources? Does that work? Does that, and if not, what would be a better approach?
In our last podcast, one of the things that I suggested when you asked about how to get more connected to modern touches, I said, well, maybe you could find a project or an area to get these champions and get people
Right,
engaged. And so that's one suggestion is find the people whose passion and energy and brains are already driven towards doing some of this work and maybe have it be a passion project or a side project or give them carve out a little time for them. They can also hire a consultant to come in and provide some augmented resources for the boost through the initial prototype and help support the staff in making something like that happen. And like I said, it could be a small start with a small play and hope it becomes bigger as opposed to put all your eggs in one basket and go for the big bang for the buck.
right,
Those are two thoughts, Glenn, that might help with both the I get the resource crunch and I get the lack of time, but one of the things I've seen is with some of the free trials in Fabric and some of the other tools that are really aggressive in coming after folks. They can try some things out at a lower cost and maybe do some prototyping. And that's part of what I'm suggesting is maybe some time to do that.
right. So yeah, what I see at organizations, a lot of times they'll have people that are either, they're good at one thing in particular. So they may be, you know, really good at reporting or analytics or Tableau or something like that. But maybe they don't necessarily have, more of the fundraising expertise, right?
Mhm.
So I've seen this with organizations, they'll actually bring in somebody's like, all right, we're going to commit to this. We're going to do analytics now. So they'll get a full-time employee now, they'll hire for this, and that person will have, all the skills on the analytics side of things, but on the specific knowledge of what's required for a nonprofit and then specifically around those goals, there's a learning curve.
Yes.
So that's what I see the struggle being is that how can they, you know, how can they just go from nothing to be able to start to create some of these things? And even, yeah, you can hire a full-time employee, you can task an existing employee, you can do these little pet projects, but I think um I think it's still difficult to get something real out of it because it just, I don't know if it just takes a commitment in time or or a little bit of luck or both. But I think it's still difficult for people to be able to put all the pieces together. So
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I do see the disconnect, particularly for the newer hires coming in. A lot of times we're working with higher education, and people have been there 20 years. So I'm talking to a data analyst, and I talk through a model of major gifts with proposals, with life cycles and outcomes, and they know everything because they've been there long enough. Um, so one thing I would suggest, based on what you just said, is start with where you are, and depending on the maturity of your organization, take a look at some basic KPIs and performance management. So if it's major gifts, what kind of reports are you thinking about for analytics on fundraiser individual performance? Are you doing, basics on, phone calls, activities, opportunities, close ratios, close dates? And what I'm saying is, you do the deeper dive discussion on what do we want to measure and what do we want to achieve, and that starts to build the muscle tone for the more important work that we just talked about, which is really more level 2, level 3, which is how are we going to get more aggressive and create a new goal and drive our teams and our data to new heights to achieve something we haven't yet. You can't do that unless you're already tracking baseline performance. So whether it's annual fund, major gifts, planned gifts, where the dollars are coming in, event-based revenue,
sure.
what sort of measures are you doing now, and are you using a Tableau or a Power BI with some base analytics
Hmm.
to track that performance? Get your team going there. Have them have a basic conversation around, um, where do we want to go, and how are we getting there? Do the reports show that? What do these reports show in terms of demographics, analytics, or opportunity for growth? And can we set some small goals and then see a move in the bar, and then get to where I started this conversation with you, which is set a bigger goal and set a project and try to drive a change in the results. But
Right.
as I work with organizations, they're on such a different depth. I'm sure you've seen this, right? You walk in the door in one place and they've got KPI bars and they have regular meetings and they're doing that. And you're like, okay, so you're ready for something else. And you go to another organization and they don't have any of that baseline. So it's like you've got to get to the baseline first.
Yeah, and it's, I think part of it is culture. I think part of it is how, who's in charge and how they, what KPIs are they tracking? What, how are things coded? Like what are, and all of that trickles down in terms of, what is management looking at, and then how does that trickle down for how it's all coded into the database, right? And I think if you have a lot of turnover at organizations, you'll have people come in with different philosophies, and that will in turn impact, how the data maybe is entered into the database and tracked and all of that. So you can sort of, and then what does that create? Well, maybe you'll have a lag where it's like, well, we really can't look at data over 3 years old because it was using the old system, and we don't do that anymore. Now we look at it in this way. It's like, well, can you map it over? It's just like, well, we could, but it's, we're just focused on this right now. So I see it as, when I see organizations that have management that's been there for a while, there's some tenure, if you will, amongst the staff. There's kind of a cadence on doing things, and they get into a rhythm, and
Mhm.
then it feels like that's culturally is it's more of a culture thing than a technology thing a lot of
No,
times. So
I think you're
yeah,
absolutely spot on. And, if you noticed, I phrase things in terms of, we believe there's more opportunity for planned gifts than we're achieving.
yeah,
You're not attacking an individual, a department, a group, a
sure,
core practice.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
support what you're saying about culture.
right,
It really matters. This isn't perceived as some sort of thing that's a threat, that somebody's doing something wrong. I've seen that be the worst
yeah, yeah,
rollout,
of
right?
course, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
let's put a number on the board and it's in red, and it's like, okay, so let's think about what we want to do here.
So what can Fabric do? So you mentioned Fabric, so you're talking about Microsoft's tool, Microsoft's technology. What can Fabric do that is different than all of these other things that we've already been playing around with, like data warehouses and Tableau and Power BI and stuff like that.
You know, Microsoft has a tendency to create these words and replace other words and
Yes,
then
they
lump
do.
things that used to be one thing into another. And
Right.
boy, Glenn, I mean, you know this game, right? It's like, what is .NET, right? And you remember those days. And well, .NET's a client side, it's a server side, it's a toolkit, it's build technologies, dev, it's everything. Fabric is yet another example
Right.
of of
Let's
this
take a bunch of
Microsoft.
stuff that was already there and bundle it with this other stuff, and now we have a new thing.
I
And you're going to
what,
call it Fabric from henceforth.
pretty soon
Yes.
it'll be Microsoft Fabric Copilot Pro, right?
Don't
Or
give them
Mac.
any ideas, Bill. That's, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Glenn.
That would
Um,
make too much sense if you named it that, because then you
that's
would
right.
know what it is just by the name. That's the thing. They have names that it's just like, I don't know what this name means. Even Copilot is just like, okay.
And even in the sales literature, trying to track it down and get a price for it is a nightmare. But what I do like is really a cloud compute based evolution of traditional SQL Server analysis server technologies. So things that in the past were hard coded on premise in a SQL Server analysis environment are all now fully migrated as compute resources in the cloud, from the pipelines themselves to configurations, the data extract, the connectors that apply, and then applying data transforms, and then applying visualizations. So their journey and evolution is, how do we make everything that was SQL Server analysis services become cloud friendly? And that means rethinking and rebuilding every component in the stack, and they're most of the way there. The maturity that I've seen in the past year has primarily been around the pipeline extract, which they had four different ways to do it, and
So
they had
suck all my data out of my on-prem database and shove it to the cloud every night, but it can do that and not blow up everything.
it
Okay.
worked. I've been watching it in action, and I've been seeing it scale into the millions of records in a highly performant way, and that impressed me. And the other thing I mentioned, I believe briefly, but they can do that very quickly, and then you can apply the transforms after the fact. So you can do a raw data extract and then do some more modeling. So the things that have matured are the data extract and the performance of that, where there's still some early adopter struggles. Probably is pricing and compute. So what level of power in the cloud is required? Is it an F2, an F4, an F32, an F64? Do you get free Power BI licenses from that at different levels? If I'm running a complex transform, I need the compute power here in this workspace. And then if I have 100 users, I need compute power here. My caution is that we talk about ROI. Sometimes you've asked me a couple of times, and it looks like it's there, but what happens if you're vastly requiring more compute than you thought, and now it ballooned from $300 a month to $2,400 a month, and you weren't expecting that? So that's probably my caution, Glenn, is people don't know how to do some of that estimation and juggling yet, and so there may be some pain after the fact. But I am seeing success with it, and
So when you say success, what does that look like? Like what can Fabric do? Is there anything it can do differently other than it just happens to be in the cloud and maybe work better? Is there anything that from a practical or just, you know, consumer of it, if I'm just like, I just want to see the reports or just know that the magic that happened on the back end was magic that was not otherwise inaccessible to us. And now that it's been fabricized, trademark Microsoft.
I like that. I like
Um,
that.
Now we can see these things that were invisible before. We can, yeah. There's what can Fabric do? Is it just, lipstick on the same Microsoft Analysis Power BI stuff?
The one way I'd phrase that, I think, is thinking about a lift and shift from a hidden location of some code that sort of buried in an archaic SQL Server Analysis Services ETL code that's tight SQL, and it's buried on a server somewhere, and no one even kind of knows what it is or how it works. So the level of arcane magic required to understand how the whole system was put together and how it works, and to fix it or make changes to it, is probably fairly fragile or brittle or difficult to maintain and model. It works and it's on prem and you can do it all and you can get in there, but the resource requirement and the visibility and transparency of it all is a little, maybe leaves something to be desired. So I know that I'm being technical in my response as opposed to sort
You're
of,
being diplomatic in
you
your
know,
response. Yeah.
well, no, I
Yeah.
actually have seen the value in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I log into a Fabric instance. I go look at the workspace. I see the pipeline. I get permission to do it. I see the connectors. They're all sort of point and click and plug and play, and I know what everything's doing, and the whole system just makes sense, and it's all there.
Is that because of your experience though? Because what you're describing, there's this new catchphrase now, and it's legit, but the catchphrase of tech debt, right? So you're describing maybe tech debt in a data warehouse. So we invested in all this. Somebody at one point in time, whose name shall not be mentioned, but somebody at some point in time said a data warehouse was a good idea. So we invested all of this time and effort to make this system, which now you're calling archaic or old ETLs and stuff like that. And now moving it into the cloud system, okay, there's more visibility into it, but does that visibility, is it really easier to use? Or is it because you, with your experience and your background, you can see and play with more things, but can the average person who's just sort of getting started in this sort of thing get in, start using Fabric, take an existing ETL process that's maybe, very fragile, move it into the cloud, and it's going to be more easier to work with?
I think it's more approachable. I think it's faster to build and faster to deploy than it was in the past. So, for example, I was working on a project and the price tag probably in the old tools way would have been about $300,000, and we did most of the work for about $100,000. So I do think there are legitimate lowered costs. That cost, however, did not include what I just said, ongoing running and maintenance of this solution. So that's why I was also tempering what I'm saying with the fact that, what does Windows cost in the cloud? I can't remember now, but Microsoft's charging some monthly fee for Windows in the cloud, whereas you can buy a computer with a Windows license for $400. So you're paying
Right.
way more in the cloud for that. And so
Of course.
it's you're
Yeah.
I'm tempering what I'm saying, but I do
Yeah.
believe there are some advantages, Glenn, that I've seen on a couple of real world projects. I also think that it's easier to divide and conquer the workload and have visibility for a multi person team, and easier to have visibility into some training and distribution of work. Whereas, you know, you think about the fact that a SQL Server ETL running as a SQL agent job, um, knowing where that is, what that is, who's got it, who's got access to that. This is all now more in a cloud-based environment with permissions, with the ability to create copies of things, create test instances of things, make changes, deploy back to. You can do all of that in these older school environments, but it is more expensive and more difficult to do it right. And I'm not a salesperson for Fabric. I'm just trying to figure out what
So
this is
he
the new thing.
says, but yeah.
Yeah, so
So have you played around with any, I don't know if it competes directly, but I've heard, there's other solutions out there like maybe Snowflake, right? Some of these other data warehouse cloud type solutions.
I'm hearing great things about Snowflake. The positive side I'm hearing is enterprise class workloads, emerging connector and partner network, growth in support, growth in customer base. The primary negative I hear is cost and expertise. So,
And getting
um,
hacked, but that I won't talk about Snowflake
that.
getting hacked. Yeah, that's
Um,
just a
it appears to be incredibly viable in the for-profit market and commercial space. And I think non-profits have that sort of secondary thing of what's priced right for our environment. And I don't think Snowflake is wrong, but I don't know how many peers are going to be using it. And that would be the other consideration. I see a lot of Tableau. I mean, I think for a long time it was beating Microsoft,
We were
sound.
on the Tableau bandwagon for a long time, and then they got bought by Salesforce, and yeah, our interest, our enthusiasm immediately uh, waned
I feel like
because of the pricing and
pricing,
just
yeah.
everything else that sort of went along with being part of the Salesforce universe. So yeah.
What do you see, Glenn? Do you see tools or technologies or trends in this area that are kind of crossing your desk in your mind?
I think people are at a crossroads right now. I think they have invested in some of these things like Tableau, maybe Power BI. I think people want it, and I don't know if it's realistic or not, but they want it to be more integrated and stuff they already have. I don't think they want to go buy a new thing and have to figure out a new thing. So if this stuff can be integrated, this is one question we get all the time from BlackBaud CRM is why can't our Power BI be integrated, just like in BlackBot CRM, like through an iframe or somehow embedded within the BlackBot CRM. Can't can't you just do that? Can't you just put in BlackBot CRM? Because our users are already in there. The permissions are already in there. Like we're already used to working in there. Why do we have to go like do a whole nother thing? So I think people are cautious because some of them have been down this road before. I won't say they've been burned, but it's just like they're they may have an existing investment in Tableau or whatever kind of data warehouse that they've built out. And so they're definitely curious and to see, what's coming next, but I don't see people lining up to throw money at the problem necessarily. So,
I agree with that. When I was at BlackBaud, one of the projects, Glenn, that I was trying to champion and move forward was the idea of interactivity with tools like Tableau and Power BI with the Sky APIs of CRM. And I
right.
had real trouble getting traction. Nobody wants to be first. And to be fair, it was immature and it didn't always work. And even BlackBaud, is saying those things now and continues to say them, but I still wonder how much investment they're placing on the quality, maturity, and reliability of these APIs on the CRM side. So I think there's still some work to do.
Yeah.
For me, the possibilities are endless, and it's always, hey, look what this could do. But we're still always right on the cusp of being there, not there yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, APIs are not the solution, in my opinion, because APIs cannot move, or at least they're not designed. Of course, you can design it differently and go do something differently, but they're transactional. Get a record, update a record, that sort of thing, right? Now we're talking about I want to move my whole data. I want to do this big, massive ETL process. Basically, suck my database into this other thing. An API is not going to be good at that.
No, but I am thinking of another scenario, right? One of the cases I was working on was pull data out, and I see that we're still sort of on that point. But once you do, you move into Tableau or Power BI and you slice and dice it. So you use slicers, you use dicers, you're getting constituent records or gift records or some other thing. And then I want to click a button and write back via the API the result of my work in the third party external tool, create an interaction record, make some changes to a record, do something. And that's where I got traction. I had a project that worked. We were done and it proved and it did work. But that was 2 years ago and I have not seen that take off. So what's holding that back? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. No, I mean that would be cool. And I guess if there's an API, what would be holding that back? Because it would just be just a matter of connecting the dots, making this widget talk to that one. I don't know.
Lack of understanding and an entrenchment in the traditional Infinity SDK. So a lot of the customers have the teams and the staff and the know-how to do it old school, and that's what they're used to. So as with anything, it's a change, and is it worth it to learn that, roll it out, build and deploy? And I do think there's questions around building tools and Power Automate that are maintainable and secure and scalable for enterprise that I haven't that some of these organizations maybe have some doubts about. Have you seen that sort of sense of Power Automate or workflow engines? Are you getting anything coming your way about those things?
No, but I think it's coming. I don't know if it's Power Automate, but I think like what percentage of nonprofits day to day is the same thing over and over again? It's probably fairly high. So it lends itself to automation, right? And there's a lot of these processes and whatnot that can be automated. And I think a lot of the time, what is the staff doing? They're really just managing all the one-offs for various things. But even then, those, you know, there's probably some generalizations and some automations that could happen around that. So I think people are going to start to pay attention to it more. I don't know if Power automates it because there's a lot of other things that are out there as well.
What I like are the models and the discussion. I'm not convinced. I'm agreeing. I like Power Automate. It's easy to use. It's easy to deploy. It's easy to build these things, and it works really well for prototypes and mock-ups. I'm still not sure yet about deployment in an enterprise environment, and I think it could for sure because enterprises are doing it, but it hasn't necessarily achieved critical mass. And but the good news is by writing open APIs with Sky, BlackBaud creates the opportunity for other tools as well. It's not going to be dependent on Power Automate. So um, ideally, any workflow engine we could start to see a future where some of that efficiency gain from email interactions to approval cycles to multi-step processes could all have some tools that would add some efficiency, I think.
Yeah, I'd come at it from a different angle where we were looking at something for more on the security side of things that would help with automation. So in the security lingo, there's this concept called SOAR, which is security, orchestration, and automation. I don't remember what the R is, response or something. But basically the idea is if bad thing happens, someone clicks on a phishing link, we start to see indicators of compromise on a system, then this thing would kick off, run a bunch of scripts, do a bunch of automated things because time is of the essence in those situations
Hmm.
and lock down, quarantine, whatever, sort of to try to get ahead of some of these kinds of things. And there's some new tools that have come out. There's one we're evaluating called Tines. There's another one called Torque, Torq, Torq, that are cloud players in this space that do kind of what this, Power Automate is, but on steroids. I mean, or like it's like Zapier, but like, 1,000 times more robust in terms of all the different things it can do. So we were looking at those kinds of tools. We ended up finding one that's an open source tool that we really liked called Windmill that basically has this concept where you can have scripts, you can chain them together into workflows. You can actually then front that with an app like you would with Power Automate, and the whole thing is tied together with an API. So you can have API endpoints for scripts, for workflows, for all of these things. So now you get to the point where you can have queues, you start to do some really cool, powerful stuff that you can look at automation, in a more um I think that's it. Just having a good foundation that is API first. And from that, you can see, okay, what different things can we integrate into this? But just know if we have this this component that is scalable and is extendable, and we're not going to kind of run into the same problems we've run into in the past, which is having these monolithic systems that, you know, only Ted knows how to do because Ted was the ETL guy and Ted was the data warehouse guy. So now we're totally relying on Ted, and now we have tech debt and stuff because of that. To have something that's more extensible in that way. So
I think that's the key. I mean,
yeah,
it's why a commitment, not more than just a commitment, but the delivery of APIs. And, regardless of what type of selection I'm involved with and helping customers, it doesn't matter what tools you're picking overall, as long as they work and they have an API so they can plug into your ecosystem.
Right, right.
You mentioned something about the security side with the SOAR.
Yeah.
What are you seeing sort of change in the security world? What are things that are crossing your desk in your mind related to how security is transforming, particularly with trying to manage private data centers and secure information and cloud? Like what's happening with you?
One of the things that I, especially in this discussion of data warehouse, is that maybe not a good thing, but people, organizations will pay a lot of attention to making sure that their production data is secure. And I think by and large, they do a pretty good job of that. So wherever my production data lives, they'll put care and attention into that. Then when it starts to get into some of these other projects like data warehouse, like analytics, like some of these other things, little, if any, attention is given to the security. And I think the thing that people need to realize is that it's the same data. Is the same data. If your dev data, which is a copy of your production data, gets stolen, the same effect takes place. The
Right.
only the one difference with your production data is that there's of course the integrity of it's the production system, and if something bad were to happen, but that's not what's typically happening. What's typically happening is laptops are stolen, databases are stolen, systems are ransomwared, and data is exfiltrated out of these systems that are copies of the data. It's not the
Right.
production data. They got a copy of the data, and that's just as impactful. And maybe that's actually kind of a wet blanket in some ways. When I say this, then people just be like, "Well, I guess I can't do anything then." So this, I don't know how to secure this stuff, so forget that data warehouse fabric project. Um, but yeah, I think that's one of the things. Maybe I don't know if people think about that, but it's something um, that I think about a lot, and I think people need to be concerned about. Of course, with the cloud, there is a lot more security available, and there's more visibility into it, and it's going to be sort of in a way locked down by default. A lot of the default settings and stuff, you're going to be secure. A lot of the problems you kind of had to worry about with just your
Mhm.
normal systems, you don't have to worry about. But again, on the flip side, you have maybe a proliferation of the data, right? You have systems, dev systems, test systems, sandbox systems, this system, that system, the other system. It's where's my data? I don't know. It's everywhere. We don't even know where it is anymore. And it's like it's a problem. I think uh I don't know if there's accountability then. I think another thing that happens with organizations is that um they think if it's in the cloud, then they don't have to think about it anymore. So you'll see this very, a lot at higher ed and healthcare foundations. All these regulations, all of these compliance issues that if it's on-prem or even with a hosting provider, okay, we have to follow X, Y, and Z, check all the boxes. The auditor needs to be happy. All the people need to go through all the things. The minute it goes into the cloud, nope, not on my watch. It's in the cloud. That's on someone else's watch. And it's sort of out of sight, out of mind.
What tips would you suggest for people that are trying to kind of deal with both of those things?
It's not a tip. It
Okay.
has to be strategic. It's a
Mhm.
data governance issue, period. End of story. That's it. If you don't have your data governance under control from the top, from the board level, that's you have authority and sort of gravitas behind getting a handle of all of this, then doesn't matter what happens everywhere else. Because of course, there will be, there might be an individual, an organization, even at a management level that will say, by golly, we need to do X, Y, and Z. But if it doesn't come from the top, then it's not going to be part of the air everyone breathes. It's not going to be enforced. There's not going to be audits around it just to double check. And so it needs to come from the top, and it needs to be strategic. And there's a lot of tips that I could give after the fact. But if you don't
Right.
have that,
Yep.
then you're you're not going to know what you don't know, right? And you can't disinfect what you can't see, I guess.
Right.
So yeah.
Do you think that impacts our discussion of things like analytics and even AI? Do you think a solid policy can be broadened to be inclusive of innovation and growing quickly?
Oh
Or
yeah. I mean, it's not that you can't do it. It's not that you should be afraid of it, but it's just that you need to know, how where the data is going, who has access to it, how it's being used, and is there some auditing around it after the fact? It's like, okay, they said they're going to do XYZ, but someone needs to go and check and see, yes, this is actually how the data is being used. Yes, this is how it's being accessed. Here's where it resides. Um, Here's how we delete it from these different places after the fact. We have certain rules. It's not going to be on your laptop. It needs to be in the cloud, because it's in the cloud. We can control it. We can at least have some visibility, some audit logs around it. If it's on a laptop,
yes, it's interesting. I think we've talked a little bit about resource challenges, right? And I wonder if that's part of the challenge here as well. You have to have both the policy and then the will and the time to carry out some of these. But as you said, I think it's having the top-down approach means that it becomes built and embedded in the culture, and then it's not an extra 10 minutes. It's simply this is the way that cycle needed to work, right?
it comes back to the culture of the organization. And a lot of nonprofits are not, it's not a criticism. Well, maybe a little bit, but are not security first, right? Cybersecurity is not something that is part of a mandate or is part of anything that the board talks about. I think maybe it's changing more and more now because cybersecurity insurance is now a thing and required for organizations. And so I think it comes up in that regard. But, there'll be another side of the house. There'll be the IT side or the security department side. They would come in and they would have their own um, mandates, whether it's PCI compliance or whatever, that need to be followed. But it's not something that I see, at least, that boards are typically seeing as part of their mandate, protecting the data.
Maybe that's part of where some of the education needs to expand, if you will, in the
Yeah.
industry is some awareness. And nothing would do that like a new bill for a new insurance policy at the board level, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess just on the thought of AI and just kind of wrap things up here, um, I'm not in general an advocate of more regulation, but what are your thoughts? Like, especially with AI, do nonprofits and does nonprofit technology need more regulation or less to kind of help manage some of these issues? Do we need a stick to beat people on the head with at the board to say, you better start taking care of people's data or else? Or is the or else going to just happen naturally?
These are two different questions, but um, I, I don't see a need for it yet for nonprofits because they're not abusing the data nor the information. They might not be following as solid as security practices as they might, which you brought up, and so potentially this could be co-intertwined. Thinking about how data is shared, um,
Right.
I do think that we're in such a state of flux with AI right now, right? I mean, look at what just happened with with a Chinese AI model coming out, and where is it located? Where is it sourced? Where is this data going? What is it being used for? And I want to be careful in how I come across with this. Those are unknowns and those are risks. And so I think that's the part of what I say is there's risk in all of it. And, that's why I was suggesting go small, not go big, because things can disappear on you. If you're betting your business on this $5 million pie and all of a sudden the technology changes or a legal framework changes, you just put a huge investment at risk in terms of a custom AI program. So, Glenn, I'm not in favor of more regulation for nonprofits specifically. They're already, for the vast intents and purposes, conservative in their approach to data and information and the usage of it. Um, and they're not doing a lot with it. So that's why I think experiment and learn is the right answer for now. And maybe just having some more conversation about what they're doing and some dangers, right, that might emerge. And I'd love to see that conversation continue.
Yeah, I think a lot of nonprofits or just people in general maybe don't realize that some of these AI models you can get yourself and download and use just on a system. It's just a file basically on your system that you can stream text into and get text out of. It doesn't have to be in the cloud. It doesn't. So that's a way that people can, have a sandbox and sort of mess around with some of these things, learn in a safe way. Yeah.
Feel like there's room for some sort of provider to provide some more private cloud kinds of options for AI
If
and
only there was such
LLM.
a provider out
Yeah,
there.
I
It's
wonder who could do
amazing.
that.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much. It's been a privilege to talk with you here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been wonderful to have somebody who has the depth of experience, both in technology and with nonprofits, as you have, and all the time that you've spent at BlackBaud. And of course, now um, we had talked about this in the previous podcast, but you have your own business now where you're doing consulting around some of these technologies like Fabric. So it's wonderful to have your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I'm excited to see where you go with your conversations. You guys are doing great things at Concourse Hosting, and really a pleasure to be here and to chat with you. You are an excellent host.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Alrighty, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Data and Confused. I really appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and subscribe as I get this podcast off the ground. I have a lot of amazing guests planned, industry experts and thought leaders from the tech and cybersecurity world. So look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thank you.